Ai squeal. Ai kunas ilam nana. Good day. It's really good to see you.
And I notice on Sundays, for example, we say haichka,
Haichka is the local
which is
language for thank you.
thank you.
Yes.
Okay, it's an acknowledgement. Right. Anyhow, you've done a great job of opening up unity here and inviting our Indigenous relatives to come into our center and share their songs, share their culture, share their truth with us. And what I've noticed in that is their appreciation for that opening.
Well, it's necessary, really, and it's the way that we can contribute to just changing consciousness. And I think actually meeting individual people, person to person, is the only way that we'll really fully get to absolute cooperation. Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that we are recording this the day after Manitoba has elected an Indigenous premier.
Yes.
And I think it's Wab Canoe from the Onagaming First Nation, which I think in the media we saw that he's the first First Nations
I wouldn't be surprised if we saw that. Right.
person.
But-
And then we also saw, though, that in 1878, John Norkey was Métis,
Yes.
also a premier of Manitoba. So
Manitoba.
clearly Manitoba is way ahead
Way ahead.
of the rest of us.
Yeah. Although there are, elected politicians from almost every province serving in the House at the moment, and across all party lines, which is interesting, from Conservative to Green Party.
Yeah, and we should mention that Wab, Premier Wab, is of the New Democratic, the
Right.
NDP party
Right.
in Manitoba.
I was just talking to Thomas before we started about the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People that Canada resisted signing along with New Zealand and a couple of other countries for a number of years, but finally accepted that in 2016, officially accepted that. That was a year after the Truth and Reconciliation Report came down in 2015. And ironically, they called that honoring the truth, reconciling for the future. And in a way, I thought that a little jarring, to honor the truth. When we discovered what the truth was, it felt to me like not something we wanted to honor, but the word recognize might have been or accept or to acknowledge appropriate to me, because for most of us from the settler side of society, we didn't know.
Right.
Not very much, anyway. It's just in recent years that our actual history has been taught, and has caught a lot of people by surprise. So,
Yeah, the wrongs that were done.
right.
And so, I think that's a wise way to put that. Do you really want to honor those, or do you want to acknowledge them and
Right.
heal them?
Right. But from the point of view of honoring the stories that were told during that process, yes, we honor that for certain. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Going back to 1996, remember Oka in Quebec?
Yes, I do.
That was the start of a lot of recognition. Finally, the dissimilation was a complete failure. That was not the way to make a successful country. And that was one of the first times the Indigenous people stood up and demanded the rights under the treaties that were being ignored. And that's pretty much happened all across Canada, and is an ongoing process of getting that resolved. But that started to wake us up, I think,
Yeah.
back in Oka. Yeah.
Yeah, and I certainly saw some of that on my motorcycle trip to Unity Village. It was all in America,
Right.
so it was from the American perspective. And one of the Indigenous peoples that I came across, I think I'm going off of not so great memory,
Right.
of the notes I had taken. But it seemed to me that in the beginning, their agreement was for like 70 million acres of land.
Right.
And then it was discovered that there was gold on some of that land. So then the treaty was rewritten to be 7 million acres of land.
Right.
And then forestry became a really big thing.
Yes.
And then the treaty was rewritten for like 700,000 acres of land. And, you know, I remember as I read that, just thinking like, how does that, what makes you think you have the right to, I mean, first of all, to treaty that, like
Right.
to even put people in a position for wanting a treaty to do something they've been doing for their entire existence.
Exactly.
And then to just keep backing out of it,
Right.
To keep dishonoring the
Right.
very agreement you came to.
Unfortunately, I think the United States is way behind us in reconciliation with the Indigenous people, because that's been overshadowed so much in the States by the black-white racial tension. But, you know, it's the doctrine of discovery was a papal bull in 1400 and something, which told the explorers that if they came across an undiscovered land, a new land, which was not governed by a Christian king, that was terra nullius, which means empty land. And it was up for grabs, and the inhabitants were non-human and therefore could be claimed for the sovereign state, mostly England, France, Spain, and Portugal at that time. And that has affected Canadian politics right down to the way we think today, that we had
Right.
somehow the right to this land.
Right.
Yeah.
So let me get this right, because I have never heard this before. So and shame on me for
Yeah.
not knowing this. So to understand this correctly, those people were not people that were here before,
That's right.
because they weren't of Christian descent or under a
Right.
Christian king.
Right.
And therefore, if you came across land and you were a Christian king or working for a Christian king, then you could claim that land as yours.
The land was empty.
It was
Although at that time, in the 1400s, it's estimated there were 100 million indigenous people occupying North America, called Turtle Island.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we have a lot to own up to.
Yeah, and I don't think the purpose of this is to feel bad
No,
and to
there's no
you know,
point in
oh,
that.
we're horrible. It's again, for me, it's even just knowing. Just
Yes.
even getting to a
Yes.
place of understanding that there is something that has happened in the past, and that we need to recognize
We can
it.
do better.
And going forward,
Right.
we really need to strive for a much better outcome.
We do. And I think, you know, people say, well, we didn't do it. And I say, no, we didn't, but our ancestors allowed it to happen, even just by voting for who they voted for. And we have benefited from that. And I don't think we need to give up our homes, but we need to come from that space of we owe much of what we have and are grateful for to, we got it on the backs of the Indigenous people. Right, so the Truth and Reconciliation Commission set forth 94 calls to action, how we might make things better, and much of it is political, but there's call to action number 49, which reads, we call upon all religious denominations and faith groups who have not already done so to repudiate concepts used to justify European sovereignty over Indigenous lands and peoples, such as the doctrine of discovery and terra nullius. And to repudiate means to refuse to accept or be associated with, to deny the truth of. And it's interesting, some of the major denominations, particularly those that were involved with the residential schools, have repudiated that. And I just thought the other day, you know, unity is a denomination, if you will, or even our individual faith communities. We have not done that. It was just sort of a given to me. And it just occurred to me that's a simple but significant step that we can take. And I happen to be president of Unity Canada, too, so we have our conference coming up next week, and I intend to put that on the agenda so that Unity Canada officially repudiates. So,
Wow.
we're woke, but we can wake more day by day in just
Right.
the little things that we can do. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because my experience has been, in the brief amount of time I've spent with somebody like Sumquatton and his family, Lawrence Thomas, then, my experience of that has been nothing but love and
Yes.
openness
Yes.
and a desire to communicate on a spiritual level that goes beyond any creeds or colors or nations or anything. It's just, it gets down to human and nature and living amongst
Right.
ourselves and living amongst one another, living amongst animals, forest, all of that becomes a oneness.
Yeah.
Which you and I have both
Yep.
read Richard Wagame's One Drum, as well as other books of his, and that's the message
Yeah.
that I take away from that is the oneness and the connection, and being somebody that is now serving in a unity, if you will, a unity community.
Yes.
Working towards oneness seems to be the real focus that I'm choosing to go after.
I think so. And at that conference we had held last year, one of our presenters had to cancel at the last minute, and so Sumquatton graciously stepped in, and we just had a talking circle where he shared and answered questions, and there were tears.
Mm-hmm.
It was the most moving part of our conference that year. So.
Yeah, and his kids have embraced
yeah.
the community
He
as
brings
well
his
and
children.
wanted to share their songs, and that was one of the real tearful moments actually in that gathering. It was beautiful.
Yeah. So I have, from another of Richard Wagame's
Embers.
book, Embers,
Yeah.
I'd like to just read a paragraph that just sums up what you started to say. From our very first breath, we are in relationship. With that indrawn draft of air, we have become joined to everything that ever was, is, and ever will be. When we exhale, we forge that relationship by virtue of the act of living. Our breath commingles with all breath, and we are a part of everything. That's the simple fact of things. We are born into a state of relationship, and our ceremonies and rituals are guides to lead us deeper into that relationship with all things. Big lesson? Relationships never end, they just change. In believing that lies the freedom to carry compassion, empathy, love, kindness, and respect into and through whatever changes. We are made more by that practice. Without the dogma, that's unity's teaching too. And I like to think at the heart of every religious tradition and faith path, that's the teaching that brings us together.
Or, should have been.
Yes,
There's a great deal of misguided
yes.
misguided actions along the way, but
Well,
that's,
again, it's the belief that we are separate and that we can gain something at the expense of someone else, and we can't. Yeah.
one of the things you that you said in that quote was the idea of ceremony, and perhaps we could talk a little bit about that because. Is it misappropriation? Is that the...
Oh, cultural appropriation. That's one of the
cultural-
things I want to discuss with Sumquatton when we have him.
Because that's a huge topic. You don't want to, for those that don't know what that is, it's the idea of just, jumping on somebody else's culture and preaching or teaching from it as if it's yours when you really haven't earned it or you don't fully understand it and you're not a part of that faith tradition or culture. And so one of the things that my takeaway from One Drum from Richard Wagame's was actually that he, if I understand it correctly, he is actually advocating
Yes.
that we take on these practices no matter what culture you are from and share them and bring them into your life. And that the reason that they haven't been shared more openly is because our Indigenous brothers and sisters were punished
Yes.
for practicing their traditions, and so they took them underground.
As a matter of fact, they were forbidden.
Forbidden,
outlawed.
right? Yeah. So they had to keep them secret, and they had to hold them close because in fear of their lives, and and so I'm at a loss. Like, what do I do? And on one hand, I have, Richard Wagami suggesting that I can use those practices and adopt them and
Yes.
perhaps share them with others. And then I have this feeling like, well, am I actually doing a disservice? And
Right.
so I'm looking forward to that
Yeah,
conversation.
I'm wearing today an Indigenous pattern, and I wonder, I did buy this from an Indigenous person, but there's, is it appropriate? I also have a basket hat that I paid for, and I did ask at the time, is it appropriate for a non-Indigenous woman to wear an Indigenous hat? And she advised me it was. But those are the things to be careful of. There have been stories of people when the orange T-shirt business came out, and we were all buying orange T-shirts, and people took advantage of that. Non-Indigenous people took advantage of making orange T-shirts with Indigenous patterns on that were not theirs, and that's inappropriate to profit off an artist's work, actually. So it's a fine line that we really should talk about so that we know what's appropriate to do.
Yeah, and that's the way you stated that was so perfect. It's actually against the law to profit off of somebody else's work in the world of copyright.
Sure.
Like, you can't run around stealing people's music and stealing people's art. So would it make any sense to be doing that
Yes.
to an Indigenous artist,
Right.
taking their cultural and their art and then trying to profit off of it when you have no relationship to it?
Or even creating your own Indigenous. I years ago was friends with Victor and Edith Newman. Victor's a Kwakiutl carver and artist in Souk. And Edith is his wife. She is non-Indigenous, but she does a lot of fabric art with Indigenous patterns. But the patterns come from Victor and their son, Carrie. Edith feels it's not her right to design an Indigenous design. So
Wow.
it's that delicate.
It's that deep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in speaking to, going back to your reference of embers, I have something here from One Drum that I love. Is peace is the reason I go to commune with Mother Earth, and peace is the gift I am offered in return. And those are the experiences I've had in everything I've read. All of my understandings is the connection to
the earth.
And to the
And to nature.
importance of nature, all of the stories of the animals that are used to tell the stories. They all have this deep meaning, and it's brought back to our humanity in some rich way that we can draw on as lessons. And I don't know about you, but as I've explored that, and then I've, going through my world religions classes and understanding Taoism and Buddhism and Christianity, just to name a few, has been like we're all talking about the same thing here.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what we have lost in our progressive modern civilization, is that connection.
Anything else?
Seems like a good place. I'm complete.
You're complete?
Yeah.
Good. Thank you so much.
We're really looking forward to arranging some interviews and discussions with some Kwan.
Yeah, I hope he can make some time for that.
Stay tuned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Haichka.
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 And I think with the hands, right?
Haichka.
Yeah.
Yes.
Haichka.